Oh,
Hey, Delegate Air.
good evening.
This is At Ease with Cia,
And Lashresce in true form as always.
as always. Sis, before we get started, what's the weather like out by you? Because it's bonkers here.
It has been a weird day. At one point, I thought, did I miss our tornado warning? The wind was blowing extremely hard. The
Homie,
rain was pouring down, and I thought I was not anticipating this. Did I miss something?
let me tell you, for the last few votes that we were on, just you thinking while you're multitask, I was like, oh, the shipyard's letting out. Wait, it's 4:30. Why is the ship? That's not the shipyard whistle. And like low-key, I might have turned the camera off so I could scramble a little bit just to make sure I was in the doorway. And we do want to, hope that everybody's okay in Isle of Wight, Suffolk, and parts of Newport News. We're hearing that trees are down. But yeah, that was wild.
I mean, not only that, I still have people in my district that don't have power, that are still trying to get reconnected as a result of down power lines and down trees. And so we can't afford for any adverse weather during this restoration period. So that did definitely catch me off guard. And I'm not sure what's happening, but climate change is real, y'all.
It's real, but we're working on it. We're working on
We
it
are. We
here in the
are.
Commonwealth. But thank you all for joining us. Maybe we know that maybe not a lot of people are available at 5:30 on a weekday, but
It's of the Mondays, especially.
yeah, but it's the last week of session, and we promised y'all a part two with friends, and so that is what we've done. We have two ladies with us to talk more about bills, and then Delegate Aird and I are going to finish up and give you some commentary, but we will not keep you long. But thank you for joining. As always, questions in the comments, and we'll get to as many as we can. But first, we want to bring on Delegate Tran, and maybe Warren is still with us. Nope,
Aww.
just Kathy.
It's just me.
I know we don't love you. We do love you, but we
love you.
are in love with
There's this little head sleeping.
Well, hey, girl, hey.
How are you? I was listening to you talk about the weather. I've been sitting in my basement all day. So if it hailed or a storm, or if there was a big windstorm, I didn't even know it.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Well, that is
there's some good to
session.
that though. There's some good to that.
But just like we did with part one, we want to hear from some of our friends with some of the legislation they're working on that's still alive or that has passed. So take it away.
So I'll start probably with my biggest disappointment this year. I had House Bill 2160, which would have made sure that for our utility monopolies that get an automatic profit bonus, we are the only state in the country that guarantee this profit bonus, that we are returning any over earnings to consumers at a time where Virginians are really struggling to make ends meet, and our utility bills are some of the highest in the country. And I think it's like 3/4 of Virginians. It's just an outrageous burden for us. So I'm really disappointed this bill died in the Senate. And you know that I'm so glad to have your support and others in making sure that we right-size this ship and offer consumer protection. So hopefully we'll be able to get it through in future sessions.
It really is the theme of this session, where all things go to die.
The Senate. Yes, that other body. But I'm really excited about House Bill 2162. And I heard about this issue from my constituents who have family members with intellectual or developmental disabilities. And it's to make sure that everybody who has a disability in Virginia, when you go to the hospital, you could have a designated support person come, either to provide help with communication or to make sure that you are getting assistance with your daily living activities like toileting and eating. And during the pandemic, I heard from so many families who made really, really tough decisions, because there were hospitals were limiting who could come in and out. People were deciding not to go to the hospital, even though they had a real urgent medical condition, because they couldn't come in with their loved ones, and they couldn't bear to be separated if somebody, couldn't communicate and such. They were really worried about what would happen. Or I had a constituent who was in the hospital for 45 days straight because she couldn't leave. And so I'm so glad she was able to do that, but not everybody can. And so we want to make sure that people have that right to a designated support person. And so I'm so glad that passed the House and the Senate. I think it's coming up in the Senate. So I'm really excited about that. Making sure that we're expanding the rights of people with disabilities in our healthcare system. Those are two things.
Thank you so much for great work on that. I know a number of those families as well. And I think that the pandemic, again, like with much else, has exacerbated the needs and the challenges that exist for these individuals and their families. And so just thanks for continuing to be a voice on that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So
continuously.
I mean, it's like such an important, and I know you guys as well, right? Like all the things we hear from our constituents, to be able to turn that into change in the General Assembly is so gratifying and so powerful, and why it's so important to have leaders and elected officials who listen to the community. So I'm really excited to be able to work with my constituents on these issues.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and give Warren a kiss for us.
When he wakes up.
Well, Kathy, I know that this, you were allowed to pick your bills. I just want to ask you another quick question, because I share a fondness with you on tech issues and data privacy issues and the challenges that will exist for us moving forward. Can you just quickly mention any work you've done this past session on that front, and why this is such a critical issue that we need to be addressing right now and not later?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for the extra minute. So I mean, we've seen all sorts of different headlines about companies that sell our private data, how it's being used, right? And what kind of protections we need. And absent federal guidance and laws, right, around facial recognition technology, and Lashresce, you've just taken incredible leadership on that issue, or generally speaking, things that are happening over the internet, we have to step up as states. And so I'm really glad to see us doing that this year. And so I have a bill around DMV data privacy. And like all of us and so many other Virginians, we either want or have some type of DMV credential, right? Like a driver's license or an ID card. And the DMV has 4,000 data sharing agreements. And when I first learned that, I almost fell out of my chair, because I'm like, if you knew that you were giving your information to the DMV and then it's getting passed on in so many different ways, and they're all legitimate ways, right? But still it's getting passed on, you'd be like, what? So I have a bill that makes sure that we're providing really strong guardrails in terms of who can access the DMV data. So whether it's like organizations for insurance purposes, or just to check your driving record if you're applying for a job, so like for all legit reasons, but also to make sure that those companies can only share the data with other people and other companies in very specific reasons, and then making sure that criminal justice entities that access DMV data through our state police also have guardrails through those types of agreements. And then lastly, making sure that we're not just willy-nilly sharing data with ICE and putting our undocumented friends and neighbors at risk. When we started the driver privilege cards this past January, really exciting times. We've had thousands of people already get a driver privilege card. We don't want ICE to go then and surveil them and do things like that, right? So we want to make sure that everybody's data, when you share it with the DMV, is protected. So I'm really glad it's heading into it just got out of Senate Finance today, so it's going to head to the Senate floor. So wish me some luck.
Absolutely. And Kathy, remind us of your district number and the localities you serve.
So I represent the 42nd district, which is in southeast southern Fairfax County. So awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of your bills. Tell your family we said hello.
We will. You might hear them in the background.
And that's just fine. Awesome. Thank you, Kathy.
Awesome. You guys have a great night.
You too. And now we are going to shift to Delegate Convirs-Fowler and see, and we have more family with us. Hi, Scarlett.
Say hi. Oh, I wasn't looking. She was talking to her.
So Kelly, tell us where you're from, your district number, and tell us about some of your bills.
Yeah, so I am from Virginia Beach. I represent the 21st district, and that is mostly Virginia Beach and part of Chesapeake. And this is Scarlett.
special guest Scarlett. Scarlett's the real guest on the show tonight, everyone.
The last session I was pregnant and
calling my name. How does that lady know me?
no, she's kind of used to the digital world. She's not used to people, actually. It's interesting that she's not used to being around real people.
You know, that's going to be a real thing post-pandemic. I think I might not be used to people. Wonderful. So, you know, you have been, you are a few sessions in, and, you know, we're nearing the end. How are you feeling about the way your legislation has fared? And what about any disappointing moments, you know, from this past session, whether that is, you know, your own legislation or whether that's bills that you were really eager to see move forward generally that's important to your communities and that just did not move forward, or maybe it did. Tell us a bit about, you know, some of your, you know, almost post-mortem thoughts as we are nearing the finish line here.
Yeah, no, that's a really good starting question. So my legislation, the biggest things that I had this year were a voting bill, a really huge voting bill that it's still in the Senate. So HB 2198 would make it so localities need to choose, well, they already choose whether they have an at-large voting with at-large system where their city council are at-large, where they can live wherever, or if they have districts, or they can combine them. They can have some districts and a few at-large members. And the issue is with how they vote, though. So if you live in a district, this bill says if you live in the district, then you have to, that you vote for that representative. Because there are some localities that actually will utilize an at-large system and everybody votes for your representative. So if you lived in District 1, everyone, District 2, 3, 4, all the voters are voting for your, so you could, District 1 could go to candidate A, but then the whole locality chooses candidate B for you. So in essence, it's an issue of fairness, and it's disenfranchising voters, and they're not able to actually choose, communities are not able to choose their candidate.
And like, I was watching the House and the Senate today, and it seems like there was some question about whether or not it was special legislation. But then I heard that there are 2 other localities that this could apply to now. The bill is written to all localities in case anybody wants to change it to in the future. So what are your thoughts on that?
You know, it's really disheartening to see it get muddled up the way it is, because it's very clear. And I keep certain things next to me here for session, like you guys probably do. And one of them is my Constitution. And, you know, I was getting so frustrated today listening, and it's just very easy. It's in there. It talks about general legislation and special legislation, and general legislation applies to all localities, and special would apply to a specific locality. So the city of Norfolk can put a tax on this, or they can set up an authority for tourism, or something very specific to a locality or a region, very specific. That would be special legislation. This is general. It applies to the entire state. But because I guess Virginia Beach is saying because they do it, they think it's targeting them. Now, I did get the idea and know about it because of them, because they've been disenfranchising voters for decades, but there are other localities that do it. Poquoson has an at-large system with 3 districts. And then there are a city council member from Waynesboro actually emailed me and said he has said that he has thought that it has been wrong for a while, that it's disenfranchising his voters, which is interesting to hear that from a more rural area. So it's same system there as well. So where it's a district system and at-large voting.
You know, Kelly, I know you have baby Scarlett with you, but I have to ask you about this legislation. You know, I've seen over the past few days that you've been very vocal about the action taken, action taken in the Senate that would allow what would appear to be quite disturbing behavior by way of messages that you can send to someone to completely go unrectified. And so I'm just curious if you can share with our viewers about the legislation you've been talking about over the last few days, and really why it's so concerning that the vote and the outcome that was the final result ended that way.
No, absolutely. That was this morning. So that was the last this morning. So it still stings. It's HB 2254. And that was to ban the sending of inappropriate, obscene pictures, unsolicited pictures So right now, you can send someone, nowadays it's texting, messaging, direct messaging, or even airdropping. I mean, that's been an issue where you imagine walking on campus and all of a sudden you're on your way to take a test and all of a sudden you get a picture airdropped to you. I mean, that throws you off. I mean, it's harassing, it's intimidating. You don't know where it's coming from, and it happens. It was really disappointing to see it not taken seriously. So this morning it was up for reconsideration, and the chair in the Senate did agree to reconsider. We had a substitute we had worked on and thought we addressed everyone's concerns, and it needed unanimous consent. And then 2 Republicans decided that they weren't going to give it that hearing. So it was very frustrating to know that we're having another year now before we can address this issue again. And right now, if I sent a picture, a constituent forwarded me a picture that they received to give me context. This was a couple months ago. And it struck me that what she sent me, technically that's illegal, because she sent me a picture of somebody else.
Right.
But if someone sends you a picture of themselves,
whether you ask for it or not.
Yeah. So, I mean, just in general, it's allowable.
And we never ask for it. Like, just to be
never.
clear.
Yeah. Let's ignore
never. We don't ever. Jesus.
So that's been the hardest part. I'll probably speak about it tomorrow, just because I've had time to, she's knocking everything over, but it's okay. This is how it is working with a baby.
But I think Kelly
would be either that or my dog barking, so it's totally normal on this show.
Kelly, I think for me, what is concerning in general, right? When you look at the conversations and the questions that were asked about your bill, when you look at the conversation and the questions that were asked for Delegate Watts's, sexual harassment bill, it's just, at some point, voters need to know how these things are happening and not just go by the votes. We got to start elevating some of these conversations and amplifying them, so that if you don't even know what we're talking about right now, you can go to bit.ly.com and the bit.ly/ capital VA, capital S Senate, capital V video. Go to Kelly, you said today?
Yep, today. It was
so today is February 22nd, and you can look at the Senate Judiciary and just listen for yourself. And the types of questions that people ask, the types of conversation, it's either uplifting, it's either amplifying, it's either clarifying, or it is making excuses for bad behavior.
Really?
I just want to make it really clear, like, we are being very diplomatic in how we are describing this. But like, if we could do a small sample poll, if you are watching right now, tell me if you believe there should be no ramifications whatsoever if someone sent you a nude picture, a picture of their genitals, like a picture just inappropriate to the maximum extent. But whether you ask for it or not, it can be sent to you and there is not anything that can be done about it. In what world would anyone be okay with that? And so to think that as the leaders of this Commonwealth, we have a problem with saying, no, that's inappropriate and action should be taken, particularly from some people that have demonstrated bias on this issue, is quite troubling. It's quite troubling.
And typically we don't even get respect and I know that this situation isn't always just men to women, but we don't usually get respect until we make it a relational thing. So it's like, imagine if this was your daughter or your mom, and like, still, it didn't even work with that. And so, I mean, we just got to really get to a point where the
communities that are impacted, we need to trust the communities that are impacted and trust their word. I mean, why on earth is no one trusting that this is a problem when women say it's a problem? I don't understand.
I mean, how do you look at it as anything other than voting for to reserve the right to do it?
But not even just a female thing. Just imagine as a man, a woman harassing you, me sending you pictures that you didn't ask for, and your wife is looking at you like, now, okay, what's this about? I mean, there should be some type of ramifications for unwanted, unwarranted, explicit photos being passed along to you, especially when it's so easy to be done in this day and age.
Yeah. And Texas does it. Texas does where they have it, it's unsolicited and it has to be with express consent. So if you don't get someone to affirmatively say, yes, I want this, then it doesn't,
Right.
you can't, like it's express consent.
And that's Texas. Like
All
Texas,
places.
not California, not Maryland or Vermont, but Texas.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
absolutely.
guess what? This is under a progressive majority.
Yes.
Don't y'all forget.
The biggest issue was the constitutional issue. It's like, well, what if, and this, I heard this line of questioning is what if someone wants to send their picture to 20 people and see if anybody bites, if anybody wants to, if that's how they pick up women. A line of conversation. And that wasn't on the floor. That was a different conversation. So it's just, we got to wait till next year. It's
really hard to imagine. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for fighting on this front. It's a very uncomfortable conversation. It is a very, quite frankly, I thought it was a really seamless issue, but the fact that it's not is very telling about.
Passed the House unanimously.
So there's some questions about the frame of thinking in the Senate and how anyone thinks that this should be allowable and permissive behavior. But thank you for continuing to fight on this issue for just everyone across the board.
Thank you guys for doing this. I watched your last one. I wasn't able to get on and I just watched. It's just good to see people, kind of engage and keep up with what's going on. So thank you all for putting the message out there.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Kelly. And our last friend joining us today is Ms. Ashley Kenneth, who joins us from the Commonwealth Institute. And we are going to shift a little bit to a really big bill, and that is our budget bill. And so I wanted to see, first of all, Ashley, before we jump into just like ripping this up, we know Delia Aird and I have had a budget session with you before, but there are people that might be watching this year that are new to this. So can you tell us a little bit about, the work that you all do at TCI?
Yes. Hey, y'all. Thank you for inviting me. It's so great to be with you. I'm a fan of your show, and I'm still waiting for my mug, which I'd love to get.
No, they're on back order.
Okay. But yes, again, I'm Ashley Kenneth. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Legislative Affairs at TCI. And TCI—
alphabet soup, what is TCI?
The Commonwealth Institute for Fiscal Analysis, or TCI for short. And we're a nonprofit based in Richmond, and we advance racial and economic justice by advancing or advocating for public policies that are designed in partnership with people most impacted and also shaped by credible, accessible fiscal and policy research. And I'm really excited to be joining you to talk about the budget in particular. As you mentioned, it's a huge bill. It's also a message about our values in the state. And it's where we decide how we're going to put our state's resources forward, either to advance or to impede equity and opportunity. So although it's not a hugely exciting topic for some, it's incredibly important. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about it.
It has always been said, you want to know what someone cares about, you want to know what our state cares about, follow the money and the investments that we prioritize.
Yeah.
And we just want to take a small step back again, because we have some folks that this is their first time. So when you look at a 2-year period, that first year, the governor drops a whole big old budget that starts like the whole shebang, right? All of the income, all of the expenses. And that was last year. And then this year, we started off in December. The governor put forward some amendments that we would make. And then the House comes up with amendments, the Senate comes up with amendments, and that's what we've done. We've passed out our amendments. But now, in order for it to pass, they have to be identical. So the bill goes into conference, just like many of the other bills that we've talked about. So now that bill is in conference, and so it's going to get negotiated. There are going to be some compromises, and then we'll put forward that finished product. And that is the work of people like Delia Aird, who's on the Appropriations Committee, and now it's with the conferees. So just wanted to give that backstory. But while—
And for anybody who, even what Delegate Price just described, which was extremely overly simplified, even if that sounded like what, there's a great side-by-side that the Commonwealth Institute produces, and it will give you a quick look and a quick glance at what the governor introduced, what the House proposed and what the Senate proposed. And then when it's done, they'll even add that additional column of what we are left with. And so if that sounded like too much for you to follow, we'll drop the link in the comments that gives you the quick at a glance relative to the priorities and the approach that each entity took towards funding these priorities.
Yep. So right now, we're just in like a waiting game sort of thing, because the conferees are the ones that are duking it out to get the differences settled between the House and the Senate. But while we're waiting, we can still have conversations, and you all can still connect with the conferees. So we'll make sure that you have the names of those as well. But actually, I wanted to ask you, like, when we're thinking about the budget, when we're thinking about where we are now, like, what are some of the things that you all at TCI are hoping are in the budget to help those that need it the most, especially with the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of really great provisions that are in both of the budget proposals from the House and the Senate, and a number of things that we're hoping make it to the compromise bill, which we anticipate seeing at the end of this week, around the 25th. We're watching to make sure that the compromise includes language clarifying and strengthening protections against evictions. The Senate put language in their budget to clarify the requirements for landlords and tenants to apply for rental assistance prior to any evictions related action. They also removed the 45-day deadline for approval of a pending application for rental assistance. So those are two things that we're hoping make it into the compromise bill. We also want to see that the budget uses the TANF trust fund for increases to cash assistance. So in addition to helping families access needed resources, research shows that increased incomes result in long-term improvements for children's health, for academics, for future earning outcomes. The Senate is proposing an 18% increase, and the House is proposing a 5% increase. Those sound like big numbers, but assistance levels would still be well below half the poverty threshold. So that's something we're going to be looking at pretty closely. And we've seen through the pandemic how state agencies in Virginia are not doing a reasonable job in providing information to Virginia's growing number of residents who don't speak English well. So we're hoping to see both some funding as well as a study to improve language access in our state agencies. We're really excited to see in both the House and the Senate and the governor's proposal additional funding for HBCUs and for other public universities who serve a large number of students of color in order to help them better support their students during this difficult time. In terms of healthcare, we're happy that both the House and the Senate provide funding for prenatal coverage for in Medicaid for birthing people regardless of their immigration status. And I'm hopeful that that provision, along with funding for doula care reimbursement, will help reduce the maternal mortality disparity that we have in our state.
Awesome. Delegate Air, did you want to ask a question?
Is it my turn? Okay. So, you know, there has been a lot of conversation about the return to school and how that affects different parts of the Commonwealth. And it brings to light the disparities that exist among many of the school divisions in their preparedness to return to school, as indicated both by the governor's announcement, but also through the legislation that's making its way through by Delegate Van Valkenburg. And so can you talk a little bit about the funding that is in either of the proposed budgets that are being negotiated right now that might otherwise assist with the return to school, as there's so many people concerned about having the necessary resources? And be honest about whether or not we're falling short, whether there are places where we could have done better that will make the return to school far more difficult. I have my own opinion, but from a pure fiscal standpoint, I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Senate decided to maintain the governor's recommendation for no loss funding, which will essentially hold school divisions harmless if they had a drop in student enrollment this year, as many did because of the pandemic. The House took a different approach to that, and they're asking school divisions to cover a portion of that no loss funding with federal money. Now, the federal funds were intended to be used for reopening costs and for remediation. And so if school divisions need to then use that money to make themselves whole, that obviously puts a number of divisions at a detriment. So if the final budget doesn't supplant that 64 million of no loss funding with the federal stimulus funding, then schools should soon have sufficient funding to begin investing in the accommodations that the CDC has recommended for a safe hybrid reopening. However, I think it's really important to note that the CDC requirements only meets like the bare bones minimum of what is needed in order to keep staff and students moderately safe from contracting COVID-19. And of course, many of the things that schools need to do, like updating their HVAC systems and installing sinks and soap dispensers, other infrastructure projects, those are going to take a significant amount of time. And there's spacing requirements, especially for older students. And I don't think any Virginia locality is up to par when it comes to making sure that those spacing requirements are met. There's going to be increased cleaning requirements and logistics. So there's a lot of things that need to be put into place, folks that need to be hired to even make sure that schools can reopen safely. And all of that is just from like an operational standpoint, right? Like, and as a mom of 2 kids in public school, it also matters to me what we do in terms of reacclimation and making sure that students have the mental health support that they need and the remediation support. And some studies are saying that it may cost nearly 3 times as much as schools have received from the federal money and from the state funds to adequately meet all of the mental health and emotional needs that our students are going to be facing.
You know, I really appreciate that. And I promise I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but I have to just slightly because
Why not?
because we might be here all night. But I have to add to, you know, really emphasize 2 points that you really made. Number one, maybe 3 points. You know, number one, we should not be requiring school divisions to use their federal dollars to then meet needs that we as a state have an obligation to fund. I think that's wrong. I think that puts our schools at a disadvantage. And particularly for me, I represent both rural school divisions, also really poor, impoverished school divisions, but then also a really wealthy school division. And the needs that exist are light years apart. The things that my more affluent school division can do come nowhere close to what my impoverished school divisions and my rural school divisions can do, just from a pure facility standpoint. And so I think we are really dropping the ball and falling short in this moment of where we need to go if that final version of the budget does not come out stronger than what we have proposed to date. You know, and then the other piece is there are a number of community variables. Like in my district, we are still struggling just trying to get people vaccines, you know, on a day-to-day basis from a just pure access to the day-to-day needs of living standpoint. It is very difficult for many of my families, and they are looking at me crazy thinking, but you want to force my kids to go back to school when they might merely just be bodies in a seat because they then don't have the necessary tools within the actual facility to succeed. I want more than anyone for school, for those kids that are showing academic decline to get the support that they need. But what's going to happen when you send them back into a school building with a teacher that you're requiring to clean in between classes, be both the teacher, the guidance counselor, the mental health counselor, the remediation teacher? I mean, all of those things by themselves, because we did not properly add the additional support that's needed to really combat, which is going to be an unprecedented level of support needed for our students that have been virtual for this period of time. So I think there's a lot of work to still be done. And I just really appreciate you walking through where we are right now.
And I just want to add and reiterate 2 things that we had talked about before. As at no point in this conversation should it be parents versus teachers. Like, I know a ton of parents in my district. I know a ton of teachers in my district, and everybody wants what's best for the child and for the student and for their health and safety. So when you hear us being hesitant about whether or not it's time or we have enough supports in place, that is so the goal of getting the children back to in person is done correctly, because we have to read the article that that Delegate Bourne shared with us today. There's things that are happening to kids that caught COVID, syndromes and things. Like, we don't know enough about this to just say, all right, y'all, I'm tired of my kids, so it's time, you know, it's time. Or, you know, and I made that in jest, but seriously, like, we understand that there are mental health concerns with them being at home. But then we don't want to kill people in order to fix that. Like, we have to do it both right. And we just want to make sure that when we say do it right, it is taking care of divisions that need more help. And so, you know, if your school division was already back in person, great. Some of ours weren't until like now. And then there's some that just aren't ready. So when we are doing things at the state level, I can't just think about the 95th district and say, all right, well, we back in, so we good. I have to hear Delegate Aird's concerns. I have to know that the buildings in Newport News Public Schools are old. And so that makes us have to think about these things in a different way. So I would love to hear more collaborative communication between parents and teachers. How do we do this to keep everybody safe? Because when the kid comes back, grandma got to be safe at home. The teacher has to be safe. The teacher has to be able to go home safe to their high-risk family. And we have not talked about it as much here, but we've mentioned it. When the CDC says go back safely with these 5 things in place, you know, arbitrarily saying 5, if one of those 5 is vaccines that are not available to certain communities, you're already at a systemic disadvantage. So when more affluent folks are talking about, yeah, well, just get vaccinated. Tell me where. Delegate Aird had to go make 2,000 herself in order for Petersburg to take them the other day. And then we had advocates calling, you know, we got churches and hospitals working together in Newport News to make them available, but it's for 65 and older. You know what I mean? So y'all have to understand all of the things that we're taking into account. So if we're trying to pump the brakes on something, it's not because we took one side or the other, it's because we don't have satisfactory answers to our questions. So again, Ashley, thank you for coming and speaking up on that. Did you want to add anything to that point?
I will just say that you said something that was very important. And I think it's true for all of these things and every single approach to legislation that we take. It is the point that doing something right means realizing that what's good for Northern Virginia might not be good for Greater Richmond. What's good for Greater Richmond might not be good for Hampton Roads or Southwest Virginia. It is not a one-size-all-fits approach. There are various dynamics in each of these regions and these communities that will make it difficult if you try a one-size-all-fits approach. And so doing it right means taking into consideration the differences of the communities based on where you are.
Yeah, and I just want to give a plug for the Fund Our Schools Coalition. They actually had a rally today about not shortchanging our students and really highlighting the fact that
Yes.
we have an additional $730 million that the governor announced last week. And some of that money could go to education, should go to education.
Absolutely.
And fund things like the Equity Fund, which you were a big proponent of, Delegate Aird. Making sure that lower poverty school divisions get increased funding to be able to cover the things that they need. So the money's there. Now it's just to make sure that the will is there as well.
And can we just whisper quietly to these leaders? I'm one of these leaders, but I'm just gonna whisper, what do you think is gonna happen in 10 years if you don't make the investment now? Like, where do you think our kids are gonna be if you do not make the investment now? So we really have to rise.
And the hour there, Delegate Aird, has to be capital O. They have to start thinking about the kids in our areas. It cannot be every man for themselves and then just like, oh, okay. Because I will tell you, it's getting hard to raise issues and then they just be swept under the rug for the greater good. Raise another issue. Well, for the greater good, let's make this small progress. We'll get to your issues later. This is my succession. Like, there's still some issues that for the greater good are still up under that rug. And so I'm just wondering, like, okay. So when y'all hear the passion that comes out, from some of the members of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, it's because it's overdue for us to have some of these conversations. So, and then Ashley, I just wanted to ask too, because there's another part of the conversation that's stemming from the pandemic, but it's all intertwined, right? Because it's all coming from the same pots of money. there have been some conversations about taxation and deductions as it pertains to federal level help that came to some small businesses or businesses in there. And then how does that conversation have to do with what we're talking about, funding the priorities and getting back to school, right? And all of that. Are there any connections to that?
Yeah, there absolutely are connections. I mean, you as lawmakers have to make decisions about how to balance, funding schools and healthcare, other services, all with a desire to help small businesses, especially at this critical time when so many have been suffering due to the economic downturn. So both the House and the Senate have passed annual conformity legislation, which generally aligns Virginia's tax code with the recent federal changes. And this is what allows people to easily transfer information from their federal tax return to their state tax return when they're filing their taxes. And the House and the Senate are both in agreement on a majority of the provisions, for example, how to provide expanded charitable deductions. But the one major exception is how to treat forgiven payroll protection program loans, PPP loans, that have been a part of the federal relief efforts. And the difference between the House and the Senate right now is about $60 million between the two budgets. So the PPP loans are already tax exempt, but as of late December, the federal government now provides an extra deduction on top of that for PPP recipients. And unlike the federal government, the state has to have a balanced budget. And so providing an unlimited additional tax deduction would require us to cut our budget. We estimate between 400 and 500 million just from the first round of those PPP loans. So in the General Assembly, the House has proposed providing an additional state deduction of up to $25,000 for non-corporate businesses, so LLCs, sole proprietorships, and partnerships. And the House plan is much more likely to help small businesses, whereas the Senate has proposed a larger deduction of up to $100,000 for all businesses. So that's like large corporations are included in that. And those were, as you know, relatively unaffected during the pandemic. And I think it's also really important to note that there's an equity component to this. Many people of color who own small businesses were unable to even access those PPP loans because they may not have had a personal relationship with the bank, or maybe they didn't have the credit necessary. So they were left out of the conversation and may fall farther behind if the double tax benefit does move forward for other organizations that did receive those loans. This is a super complex and confusing topic. TCI did do a really cool explainer, and you can find that on our website, the commonwealthinstitute.org, which looks at 3 different types of businesses and how they each would be impacted by this conversation. So I encourage folks to check that out.
Thank you. We will drop that link in the chat.
Absolutely. So Ashley, those were our questions. What else, like in a minute, what else would you say about what's going on in session or what you're hopeful for this week?
So we work on a number of bills as well, one of which Delegate Aird carried that I'm really excited about, House Bill 1990, which would allow the state to look at how a criminal justice bill might impact people of color before enacting that bill. So it would allow for racial equity impact statements, which that will go a long way, hopefully, in making sure that we pass equitable legislation that does not do disparate harm. There's a number of other pieces of legislation that we're looking at. We're disappointed today to see that Delegate Ward's farm worker legislation bill failed. That would have given farm workers the opportunity to earn the minimum wage.
Which largely impacts who?
People of color.
Exactly.
Black and brown folks.
And it's right around dinner time for some. So as y'all are eating up them vegetables and things, somebody picked it to get it to your table. And the Senate just killed a bill in order for them, so they're not protected under a lot of the workers' comp, or, just, I mean, all of the protections that we're moving forward with, and we're saying we're so progressive and this and that, we are leaving people behind when we have exclusions from it. And so they are excluded from the minimum wage. So Delegate Ward was working to get them included, and that's what is Ashley talking about, what failed today.
Well, Ashley, I want to thank you for all the work that the Commonwealth Institute continues to do, and all the work that you do just individually in advocating for so many policies. I consider the data that the Commonwealth Institute puts out to be like the Bible. If I have a question and I want to know, is this true? Is this accurate? I'm looking at the work and the word of the Commonwealth Institute is a trusted brand, a trusted entity and organization that really has led on so many critical issues, both this session and last session, and well before I probably was even in this body. So thank you so much for everything that you all are doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. So, Delegate Aird, this is the last week of session. Huh?
So we have given the people a lot.
And this is the last week of session.
Amen.
So just looking ahead, so Friday is the last day that we'll be voting on bills. Technically, Monday is scheduled to be our last day of session, period, which means we would probably have either a shortened or pro forma or ceremonial perfunctory session just to kind of finish out the things. But all of the bills and resolutions and things, conference reports would have been voted on by Friday. So if you have a House bill that's still alive, it's probably going to come up before the Senate today, tomorrow-ish. And then if you have a Senate bill, it's going to be the House before the House between today and tomorrow. Then we're also getting bills back. You had an amendment on your 1990.
Yes, so I took a bill by for the day that has an amendment that has not been, had it yet. We'll probably send it into conference because we just can't do it at this juncture. But then also have an amendment that we will accept on the bill that Ashley was just referring to. So there will be a lot of back and forth this week between hearing House bills that have Senate amendments and vice versa, and then getting conference reports back. So we still have a number of really critical bills that are in conference that are working down to final negotiations. And like Delegate Price said, we will be getting those in the door prior to Friday. But if you are constantly refreshing and waiting on an update on a certain bill, it may be actively being negotiated. And the big negotiation, the absolute largest negotiations that are occurring are around the budget. And so our business will not be complete no matter whether all our bills are passed or not until the budget negotiations are finalized. And there's one other issue that is also going to be taken up this week, and that is judges. As you know, Virginia continues to be one of the few states that has the legislators appoint its judges, and we have some final action to take on judges before we adjourn.
So Delegate Aird, we do have a question. It says, what piece of legislation are you most proud of since it is close to the end of session, either yours or someone else's?
Gosh, that's really, really hard.
Like they're all like our children. We love them equally.
I have to say that because I think, first of all, there are a number of bills that started out in one posture that I was really excited about that got extremely watered down. And we'll talk a lot about that at our last At Ease, and then also likely on the campaign trail or just in general after the session. But I will say things like restoration of rights, the fact that that was legislation that I watched being introduced by the boss I had when I was a legislative aide and members well before my time, and it has come full circle. Although the expungement legislation isn't where I would like for it to be, just the mere fact that we're having a conversation about trying to rectify that wrong, the abolishment of parole and reinstating that, the death penalty. I mean, none of these are mine, but these are all things that I can just vividly recall hearing about from so many people in our community that has literally impacted their economic viability and therefore resulted in a more diminished livelihood. And so I'm not going to get into those because those are really big issues that I think everyone can agree we're extremely proud of, at least foundationally or conceptually. If I'm picking one bill this session, I actually don't think it's a bill. I think it's the budget. I think that it will be the budget amendments that I have put in to continue to push on maternal mortality, the budget amendments to ensure that home healthcare workers, they continue to be able to thrive during this pandemic. I know you said one, but really, like, I have to go through the list, and I feel like so much of it is just really great work collectively to help ensure we're offering relief from the pandemic, but then also for those niche issues for our communities that they're moving forward and we're making steady progress. So I feel
and then we'll really work on honing that down too, because we are going to have that last one, the last at ease, next Monday after the adjournment of what we're thinking is going to be a pro forma session. Again, that means just like gavel in, gavel out pretty quickly. I would say, if I'm picking one of my own, the Voting Rights Act of Virginia, the Senate bill has passed both chambers, and then the House bill, my bill, got out today from Finance in the Senate, and then it heads to the floor. It is the most comprehensive one that has been considered at a state level. We would be the first state in the South, the first state that was under the pre-clearance provisions of the federal 1965 Voting Rights Act to pass this. It is, I think, foundational to everyone's ability to really equally and safely have their say in our fundamental right to vote. So really proud of that, really proud of the fact that it's collaborative. Lot of hard work, a lot of hard work went into that jump. And then I would just say that in general, the package of bills that a lot of us are working on for housing. We talked about education. If them kids don't have somewhere to stay and they don't have secure housing, safe housing with water and electricity and broadband, all of the things that we're working on, then we have undermined their success, whether they're in the class or not. So a lot of the things that Delegate Aird and I are working on in our committee work, but then also our bills. So that's that.
And so I can't make any promises, but as we end session, we'll have a postmortem on where we started and where we landed. I think we need to get the squad back and have Setting the Record Straight Part 2, because there are a number of bills that really, I just want to make sure our community has clarity on. We're not about to just celebrate and bring out the pom-poms for every bill that sounds like it on the surface did what we hoped for it to do. There are a number of members who have prevented some real progress from occurring. And we really need to talk about that, because if we are going to collectively continuing to make progress, especially on criminal justice reform, there needs to be a bit of truth serum served up so that you know how to hold members accountable and to make clear what your expectations are. So we'll have to figure out how to get a Second the Record Straight kicked off again. We will. So we will.
Let's aim for that, because we're gonna have starts and stops, right? So let's aim for that this week, and then we'll do that like kind of summation on Monday. But just to that point, if we're even looking at like a 12-month, let's say like June, Delegate Aird, from like June to June, right? If we want to look at June 2020 to June 2021, I need some consistency. If you did hashtag Black Lives Matter, if you went out to a protest, if you retweeted this and that, I need for your votes to look like that through reconvene session. And then what you start doing as you move into your primary elections, and then what you start doing into your general elections. I'm looking for consistency in my allies, and that's on that.
We just got a question about qualified immunity, and I promise you we are going to hold this question for the squad, because I know at least 2 members that would love to talk about what happened with qualified immunity this session. I mean, what happened with, well, we haven't gotten a final bill yet, so I'm not going to talk about it.
That's why, look, some of this we got to wait for Monday, because negotiations are negotiations.
We will get into the weeds.
But hey, before we go, I do like we're scrolling through. We're gonna answer you all. I don't see too many other questions, but I do see a lot of love. And let me tell you, on a long behind Monday, like session is compounding. It's like a marathon. So when you in that last couple of miles, you super tired from all that work you did before. So this is a very hard week for us. So we appreciate the love. We feel the love, and we want to give it right back to y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for staying engaged. Don't forget to put the questions down. Delegate Aird, have the last word.
And tell a friend that has not watched At Ease about the conversation that we are having. The more voices that we can get as part of our conversation, the better. Our work here is not because we need something else to do on a Monday night, but it's really to make sure that people are as informed as possible about what is happening in their, their General Assembly. Your vote is your currency. You are getting ready to be asked to cash in another vote in June and in November, and you need to at least know what you're voting for.
Absolutely. So you all have a good evening. We'll see you soon this
Bye.
week and Monday. We'll get you that date and time. Bye.
Bye.